Welcome to this 3-step guide on how to ruin your favorite sport using the blueprint put forward by the greatest powerlifting federation of all time when it comes to ruining sports, the USAPL. Disclaimer: this is not intended to be a personal attack against anyone who has competed in the USAPL or been involved with the federation in any capacity. I've never competed in the USAPL nor internationally in the IPF. The views presented in this video are solely mine as an impartial fan of sport and not affiliated with those of any other federations. I'll be explaining my views in more detail and addressing common counter-arguments after the end of this how-to guide. Okay. So, you want to ruin your favorite sport. How do you do it? Step 1, split the sport. This is the most important step by far. So, using the USAPL as the example, because they've done this so fantastically, let's say you have a system where you have a central governing body, the IPF, and you have all the national federations that feed up into this. Super simple system, worked super well with no issues whatsoever, right? All the national feds, national champions feed up into the IPF. The best are all there, works perfectly well. USAPL, every other national fed was a part of this. What you want to do, just like what the USAPL did, was whoosh, split yourself up completely from this system, right? Most important step if you want to ruin your sport. Split yourself and do your own thing completely independently to this perfect system that was in place beforehand, right? As far as the gap that you've created, don't worry about that. Another federation will pop up and fill that gap. Don't worry about them though. Just continue to go off and do your own thing completely independent to what the rest of the world is doing in that sport. Most important step by far. Now, to fully realize the success of this step though, you can't just split off from the sport and the governing body. You have to take some of the best athletes in the world with you. So what the USAPL did was they took lifters like Russell Orhe, Austin Perkins, Ashton Ruska, Bob Matthews, Brandon Petrie, Austin Nicolai, Daniel Clemens, Sean Noriega, Joe Borenstein, Devin Williams, Angelo Fortino, Morgan Garcia, and Keenan Lee, just to name a few. See, what the USAPL did that was so genius when it came to their master plan for ruining the sport was they took so much of the best athletes in the world away from the central system that fed up into the IPF that worked so well, right? Now, the IPF, on the other hand, was left with Taylor Atwood, Jesus Alvarez, Jonathan Kaiko, Delaney Wallace, Gavin Aiden, Amanda Lawrence, Jonathan Garcia, Heather Connor. So these were the American lifters who stayed on the IPF side. Now, when it comes to ruining a sport, this is perfect. What you want is roughly a 50-50 split down the middle where you have one half doing their thing in isolation under the USAPL banner and the other half doing their thing in isolation under the IPF/Powerlifting America banner, right? This is exactly the scenario that you want when ruining your sport. Oh, and by the way, every other non-American lifter stayed with the IPF/Powerlifting America. Again, this is perfect. Because if you're a national fed and you've branched off and you've taken some of the best lifters in the world with you, they're going to be completely unrelatable to the rest of the world. Perfect when it comes to ruining a sport. Exactly what you want. Step 2. It's not enough that you've split off from the sport, okay? Yes, that would degrade the sport significantly, but to truly make an impact, you want to make the comparisons between your newly split off side as difficult as possible with what was there before. How do you do this? Change weight classes. It's genius. I don't know why I didn't think of this. This is a genius move from the USAPL. What you do is you change the weight classes to make it even more unrelatable, to make comparisons even harder, to alienate yourselves even further from the rest of the powerlifting community. Genius. So the IPF had 8 weight classes, right? From the 59s through to the 120 pluses on the men's side, and 47s through to the 84 pluses on the women's. Now, what the USAPL did, and what you want to do if you want to ruin your favorite sport, right, for any federations listening on at home, is you want to introduce more weight classes. This is perfect. So USAPL did this very well. What they did was they introduced 10 weight classes, so not even one extra one. They put 2 extra ones in there, right? Because what's better than 1 extra weight class? 2 extra weight classes. That's right. So what they did was they diluted the talent across 10 weight classes instead of 8 for the men and for the women, right? Now, not only did they cut their talent pool pretty significantly because, like I said, they cut themselves off from the international fed following step 1, they've also now diluted the talent pool and they've made comparisons that much harder because how do you compare a 110 kilo weight class to the 105s or the 120s? How do you compare a 100 kilo weight class to the 93s or to the 105s? That's the genius of it. You make it hard to compare, right? So good. Now, By the way, this happened in 2021. I should have prefaced this with what the USAPL did and their genius plan. But throughout the 2 years where the sport was super split before it got reunified, more on this later, the biggest totals in each weight class in the IPF were what you can see here. So in the 2 years, 2022 and 2023, when the USAPL's master plan was in full effect and the sport was segregated in two, these were the biggest totals in each weight class on the men's side, right? And this includes world championship winning totals, world record totals, Sheffield totals, the whole nine. Now in the USAPL, in their 10 weight classes, these were the biggest totals that we saw in those 2 years, 2022 and 2023. Now what you'll see is in bold are the weight classes where the USAPL actually had the higher totals. Now again, this is perfect because you want to have a split between some of the best lifters in the world here, some of the best lifters in the world there, and you want no crossover between them, right? At no point do you want all the best in the world competing against one another. That is a big no-no when it comes to trying to ruin a sport. You want them as separated as possible. Now, what this achieved that was so good for the USAPL was it made comparisons not just difficult between weight classes, because, I mean, it's hard to say, I don't know how impressive a 968 at 110 is, because I'm used to 105s and 120s, right? That's what you want to do. You want to create that confusion amongst fans, right? So it's all about confusion. But also, by splitting it like this, you've now made it more difficult to see who the best in the world is. In fact, you've made the job of answering the question of who the best in the world is contentious and difficult and unintuitive. And that is everything you want to do if you want to ruin a sport. Okay, step 3, I've kind of alluded to this earlier, but you want to make it confusing for the fans to follow, right? So let's say in the old system, similar to the IPF, you have a super clear, super logical, super fan-friendly layout that starts with nationals, that feeds into the international competitions, worlds being the highest one, but you also have Euros, you also have Asian Championships, you also have some other ones, right? But you have basically the nationals that feeds into worlds, and all the best from worlds getting invited to Sheffield, and that is essentially the culmination of a full powerlifting season, right? Again, makes perfect sense, easy for fans to follow, everyone's in the one pipeline. You know, if you want to answer the question of who the best in the world is, it's super simple. You look at who wins worlds, you look at who goes to Sheffield, you look at who wins Sheffield, right? No issues with the system, works perfectly well. Now, the genius of the USAPL comes in when they split off from this system. What they had, their equivalent system, was they had nationals, and that's about it. They had nationals that fed into nothing, and that's perfect because now there is no comparison between these two sides. If you're a fan of the sport, it makes it very difficult to follow and confusing, because the best lifters from the USAPL nationals, who, like I showed you earlier, were in fact out-totaling some of the best IPF lifters, there was no worlds, there was no Sheffield for them to go to. No, instead what the USAPL did was they introduced a pro series, which was so confusing I can't even attempt to explain to you how it worked. And that is the genius of it, is because it was so confusing, it made it impossible to follow, and it made the sport that much worse, right? Which is exactly what the goal was, right? To ruin the sport. So they did a great job there. They introduced a pro series, they introduced the concept of pro cards, right? So if you're a powerlifting fan, imagine trying to equate a pro card that someone gets for powerlifting in the USAPL with a world title. Imagine trying to equate a Virginia Pro podium with a Sheffield spot. Next to impossible, right? Exactly. You want it to be impossible, right? That's exactly what you want. Okay, so to recap, just for those federations of any sport taking note at home, if you want to ruin your sport, your step 1 is to split. Step 2 is to segregate, right? So not only do you want to split, you also want to completely isolate yourself from the old system. And step 3, you want to confuse. So in place of the old system, which worked perfectly well and had no issues whatsoever, you want to introduce a more confusing system that has no linkage at all to the previous system. And in general, as a general rule of thumb, you just want to make it as confusing as possible for the fans of the sport to try and follow and to try and equate with the old system, right? So ultimately, the question of who is the best in the world, which is a question that inherently should be easy to answer for any sport in any world, I don't care who it is, you should be able to introduce me to your favorite sport tomorrow and explain to me in 30 seconds or less who the best in the world is and why. If you can't do that, then your sport is a shambles, right? So if you want to ruin a sport, then what you want to do is you want to make this question next to impossible to answer. You want to make it a disputed question that has multiple answers, which means there is no one single right answer. And that is exactly what the USAPL achieved. So yeah, there you go. There's your simple how-to guide. You can follow along at home. That is how to ruin your favorite sport. Okay, cool. Sarcasm over. So, yeah, those of you that have been watching my content for a while will know that I like to drop a fair bit of hate on the USAPL every now and then, right? Some of you like it, some of you don't like it. It's become a bit of a running theme of some of my videos. And yeah, a lot of it is, just a bit of comic relief here and there, right? Lighthearted fun. But it is rooted in reality. And I've got a lot of questions about, or from people on my videos asking, what's with the hate to the USAPL? I compete in the USAPL. The USAPL is great. USAPL is awesome, And I get all these questions, and I've replied to pretty much all of them, right? But I figured it's about time I made this video that I'm not just bagging on the USAPL for the sake of it. I'm not just an IPF fanboy, right? There is a reason why I don't like the USAPL, and that is pretty much the three-step process to ruining a sport that I gave you, aka the three things that the USAPL did that, in my opinion, severely degraded the sport, and why I hold a grudge against them to this very day. Although what I do believe in is a fair fight, and because of that, I'm gonna basically give you some of the point of views of the USAPL fans that I get in the comments. So I get three counter arguments pretty commonly when I trash on the USAPL. I'm gonna address all three of them. But before I do, as a powerlifting fan, I have one central tenet, right? Which is the number one thing I want in powerlifting, or hell, as a fan of any sport, but especially powerlifting, I want all the best in the world competing against each other for universal titles, right? I want them all under the one umbrella, under the one, set of rules, under the one federation, whatever you want to call it, competing against one another for universal titles. What I mean by universal titles is titles that are relatable to everyone in the world, that everyone has a pathway towards. Like I said, nationals to worlds to Sheffield, right? This whole having a pro series and pro cards and not having any linkage at all from that to the rest of the world or international powerlifting is, in my opinion, stupid, right? So yeah, as a general rule, anything going on in the powerlifting world, if it goes towards making more of this happen, I'm for it. If it goes against making this happen, I'm 100% against it, right? So that's my one central thing as a powerlifting fan that is an absolute non-negotiable for me, right? So here's the first counterpoint I hear from people defending the USAPL. They split for better drug testing. Now, to be fair, this is actually probably the best counterpoint, right? And in a sense, you are right. So the reason why the USAPL split back in 2021, and for this 2 years in 22 and 23, we had the split before 2024, all the USAPL lifters came back across, and now it's one sport again. Yay. USAPL died as a result, which I'll touch on that later as well, what I mean when I say that in all my videos. But the reason they split in 2021 was because they essentially wanted more drug testing, right? And IPF obviously does all that underwater because they're an international committee and, long-term goal of getting to the Olympics, you would think. Therefore, they're underwater. Therefore, they can't do as much drug testing because it's more expensive. USAPL wanted to do it more often. To do that, they wanted to do it outside of water, which obviously was non-compliant with the IPF, hence the split, right? That's essentially the gist of it. So, yeah, sure, the intent behind it was good, right? Here's the thing, though. The intent can be whatever the hell you want it to be, but just because the intent is good doesn't justify the end outcome. If the end outcome was a severe degradation to the sport, I didn't care what the intent was, right? It was just awfully executed, and the fact it degraded our sport is a fact nonetheless. Now, is the IPF testing perfect? No, far from it. I mean, we all know, we've all heard the case about, this guy from Libya who was competing on tren. Now, I mean, hey, that's going to happen in any drug-tested sport. You're always going to have a few people here and there on trend. Oh, well, big whoop, what can you do, right? No, obviously that's a joke, and I'm not even going to attempt to defend this because there is no defense for this. It is unacceptable, and the IPF testing does need to be better. I agree, right? IPF testing should be better. They should test more often. I'm not disputing that. But what I will say is if you gave me two options, so you said, okay, here's option one. We're going to have all the best powerlifters in the world competing against one another for universal titles, right? I.e. nationals to worlds to Sheffield. Or how about we severely degrade that fact and sacrifice a lot of that for slightly better drug testing? I mean, is that really a choice? If you're asking me which I would prefer, I'm going all the best in the world competing against each other for universal titles all day long, and it's not even close, right? Who in their right mind picks the slightly better testing option out of those two? Which do you think will have a bigger effect on the sport? Testing slightly more, or at the expense of severely splitting the sport in half, right, and ruining it for those 2 years? You know, as I described earlier. Who would pick that option? I don't understand how this was even a consideration. Like, to me, like I said, my one central tenet as a powerlifting fan that is my, non-negotiable is that blurb on the right that I've said a few times, so I'm not going to read it out again now, right? But yeah, nothing should come in the way of that. Absolutely nothing. Not even slightly better testing. Now, I will say, in a perfect world, every single athlete who competes in a tested federation would get tested. In a perfect theoretical world with sunshine and rainbows, right? We don't live in a perfect world. We live in a real world. That will never happen. So do we really care all that much about lower level lifters being tested? Again, I'm not saying they shouldn't be. Ideally, they would be. Practically, do we care? I'm going to say no. Because that slightly better testing, yeah, the top lifters need to get tested more often, I agree. But I don't care about lower level lifters being tested, really, as a fan of the sport, right? I just don't care that much. Like, yeah, sure, it sucks for the people that competed against that person, but for the sport overall, / me looking at the best in the world, really, as long as the best in the world get tested enough, I'm happy with that. Now, that's obviously not happening because of those recent cases we've seen. So it's not good enough and does need to get better. I agree, but not at the expense of ruining the sport. And the amount of people that come back to me and say, oh, but I competed in the USAPL at this low level and I got tested, therefore it's so much better. How dare you talk bad about the USAPL when Powerlifting America never tests? It's like, look, that's all well and good. Honestly, that means nothing to me. I couldn't care less. If you got tested as a low-level competitor, don't care, right? It's like saying any other sport. I mean, regional level boxing, right? Nowhere near the world levels, whatever. Someone there was on trend. Well, boxing probably a bad example because I can do serious damage. Let's say soccer, right? If you're a fan of soccer, let's say you're a diehard fan of the Premier League. Do you care if someone in the 7th tier of English football is on some peptide that enhances recovery? Like, no, why would you, right? As fans, we care about the top echelons of the sport. If you disagree, you can. I don't mind, but that's just my view on things. So yeah, easy choice for me. Even though their intent was good for better drug testing, it did not justify the severely negative impact it had on the sport for those 2 years. Okay, counterpoint 2, the other thing that people say to defend the USAPL, those weight classes were the original ones. How dare you bag them out for it? Okay, so IPF, the first World Championships, 1973. Obviously, it was only Raw from 2012, so it was equipped up until that point. From 1973 all the way till 2010, the weight classes on the equipped side did in fact match what the USAPL changed them to. So the, 60, 67.5, 75, 82.5, 90, 100, 110, right? All those that the USAPL now have, that is what it used to be. That is correct. But from 2011 onwards, the equipped side changed to the modern weight classes that the IPF now has. 59, 66, 74, 83, 93, 105, 120, 120 plus, right? The IPF first went Raw in 2012. From day one, the weight classes it used were the same weight classes that is used today in the IPF, i.e. the weight classes that the USAPL changed from to go back to what used to be done pre-2011. and never on the Raw side internationally. So when you guys say those weight classes were the original ones, yeah, from before the Raw side of the sport existed, what do you mean original ones? From day one of Raw tested international powerlifting, we've had these weight classes that we now have. For them to change it and go back to what it was before that side of the sport even existed is, to me, just supremely stupid. So yeah, that counterpoint, I don't really put much weighting on that one. Third and final counterpoint I will address is, I've had a lot of comments saying, but the USAPL is great at the local level. They have so many more local level meets in my area than Powerlifting America do. The meet directors are great. They're super friendly. They have great music. It's a great vibe. It's a great venue. It's a great crowd. My reaction to all that is, cool. I don't care. Again, as a fan of the sport, I don't care about how the local level is run. That might sound brutal. That might sound sad. That is just the way it is. Like I said, I'll go back to my example. If you're a soccer fan, do you care what is happening in the 6th tier of English football, or do you just watch the Premier League, right? It's the same thing. Like I said, in my quick legal disclaimer, right, to satisfy my lawyers, I'm not bagging out any individuals, right? This is not a knock against all you guys that lift in the USAPL or people who have affiliation with the USAPL. It's nothing personal. This is just me as a fan of the sport, right? Not tied to any Fed in particular, or not affiliated with either directly the IPF or USAPL. Like I said, this is me, assessing what the outcome was as from the perspective of a diehard fan of the sport. And to me, the USAPL severely ruined or severely degraded the sport for those 2 years where it was split. So yeah, USAPL great at the local level, cool, means nothing to me, because it's like, when I say the USAPL is dead, what I mean is pretty much all the best lifters in the world have come back to the IPF side through Powerlifting America. And yeah, there are a few top level lifters still sort of left in the USAPL who I anticipate will either also make the crossover to Powerlifting America, or they'll continue doing their thing in isolation in the USAPL where no one will care, and they'll just fade off into obscurity, right? If you want to be a top level powerlifter recognized internationally by the fans, by people who care, you're going to go Powerlifting America and the IPF. I'm sorry, but you will. What's the point of staying in the IPF? And that is a good thing, because it means USAPL is dying, which I think they deserve for ruining sport for those 2 years. Luckily for us, Sheffield essentially was what brought it back. So we should all be thanking the fact that event came through, or else the sport would be in a pretty bad place right now. I mean, just think about, what if other federations, national federations, started to do that? What if they all just split off and formed their own thing? USAPL did the Pro Series, maybe some other country will do some other random crappy thing that they come up with, and the IPF, we're no longer going to have the best in the world against each other. Why is that important? Well, as a powerlifting fan, what did you guys think about PA Nats this year? Wasn't it the most epic bloody meet you've ever seen? What about the Battle of the 83s? What about the 93s, right? You had Taylor Atwood, Joey B, Delaney Wallace, Sean Noriega, Angelo Fortino, Chris Perez in the 83s. In the 93s, you had Brandon Petrie, Jonathan Kaiko, Gavin Aiden, Dominic Fuqua, Brandon Jones, Demetrius Smith, all going head to head. Crazy, crazy battles. You know the reason why we haven't seen those battles in the previous essentially 2-3 years? Because of the USAPL. If the USAPL had never split, we would have been seeing all those battles for the last 2-3 years. The fact that we've only seen it from this year is because it's only really been this year, well, I guess this year / last year, where all the best USAPL lifters have realized, I picked the wrong side here, and came back to Powerlifting America / the IPF, right? So if you're a fan of PNATs this year, you have the IPF and Sheffield to thank, and the USAPL to not thank, because they're the reason why we haven't been seeing as much of that. So yeah, when I say USAPL is dead, I mean from the perspective of a fan, right? Not from the perspective of a local level competitor, right? Because as a fan, if I got someone new into powerlifting, would their experience as a powerlifting fan be, would there be any negative effect to that if I just didn't tell them anything about the USAPL? If I just introduced someone to the powerlifting and neglected to mention the USAPL exists, would they even notice? Would they even care? Would it even matter? No, it wouldn't. Exactly. Case closed, right? So local level competition is fine. That's all well and good. Keep enjoying USAPL. I'm sure they run meets fine. It's just as a fan, it means nothing. Like I haven't had to keep up with any USAPL meets because what is there for me to care about as a fan there, right? I had to back before the best lifters all came across. Now that they're back here, USAPL is now dead to me as a fan. That is what I mean. So in conclusion, I'm going to go back to my one central tenet, all the best in the world competing against each other for universal titles. This is something that every sport should have. And in my eyes, USAPL is what essentially tried to destroy this, and they did destroy it for a while before, essentially Sheffield put it back together again. So yeah, this is my explanation essentially for why I dislike the USAPL and why I'm constantly trashing them and throwing them under the bus in my videos, and why I hold a grudge against them. And this is me addressing all the counterpoints that you guys give me in the comments. So, I mean, look, you are entitled to disagree with what I've said. I'm more than happy to take further counterpoints here. You don't have to agree with me. This is just my perspective. And yeah, hopefully now you guys understand why I have a grudge against the USAPL.